Captain America Brave New World was released in theaters recently, and this is a movie that I was very excited for, but at the same time I was pretty nervous because of its troubled production. So has it lived up to its potential? To give you some more context for that troubled production, this is a film that was supposed to release like a year ago, but it went through some huge reshoots, and typically when that happens, it's a very clear sign that the filmmakers didn't have a great plan to begin with, so they had to tinker around with it during the production. And so in many cases, that just turns whatever movie it is into a mess. But did it happen with this movie? Well, if you look at most of the reviews online, they're pretty mixed, and some of them are even negative. But overall, to be completely honest, I'm actually very positive on this film. The main thing that people have been complaining about is that the reshoots are too obvious, but in my opinion, I actually thought they did a pretty good job with them overall. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely some spots here and there where you can tell that they're reshoots, especially this one scene where it's Sidewinder versus Sam Wilson, and it's very obvious that these two actors did not actually meet together in person to film this. But for the most part, this film just wasn't nearly as bad as I was expecting in that kind of regard. And I don't know if it's just because the 2017 Justice League movie had the most obvious reshoots of all time, and that permanently just lowered my standards.
This is not okay.
And to be honest, the story flowed together much more nicely than I was expecting as well. Now, a big strength here is our main character, Sam Wilson, the new Captain America, and the film definitely understands how he's different from Steve Rogers and how he feels a lot of pressure for taking on the mantle. And it was also a really good performance from Anthony Mackie. And just overall, this is a huge improvement with his character over what they did in The Falcon and Winter Soldier.
You've got to do better, Senator.
But just at the end of the day, what they did with this character here, I thought was pretty impressive overall. Now, don't get me wrong, this is definitely not like one of the greatest comic book movies of all time. It's not like the writing is Winter Soldier level. But I wasn't necessarily expecting it to be as good as the other Captain America movies because those are all like top 10 MCU films in my opinion. And also when it comes to this film, there's not like a super memorable or good score, and some of the songs in the soundtrack are kind of generic. But to be completely honest, the biggest problem I actually have with this film is actually some of the CGI in different scenes. That's kind of a problem with a lot of Marvel movies now because so much of it is CGI, not all of it is great. But regardless, when you go into this type of movie, you do expect there to be a lot of action, and it definitely delivered on that. I thought it was pretty exciting. But of course, the action doesn't seem nearly as good if there's not a good story behind it. So is this film successful in having a compelling story? The following portion of the video contains spoilers. Please proceed with caution. So the thing that's really interesting about this film is that a lot of the plot points are set up from The Incredible Hulk, obviously other Captain America movies and Avengers movies, and of course you have the one celestial thing from Eternals. And to be completely honest, that might be the biggest strength of this film. I like how it makes this universe feel more connected. Yes, you do have to watch like 30 movies to get the full experience here, but like I said, I prefer it that way because it is a connected universe. And I know a lot of people are complaining because it feels like homework to watch all the other movies, but I still rest my case. Connected universe is the best way to go. And if you're complaining that you do have to watch some bad movies like Eternals to understand everything here, that is a valid point, but it's not like Marvel can just delete a movie from their timeline when they realize it's bad, so it's better to have something set up from that to make that movie a little bit better. But regardless, there's kind of a little bit of suspense in here, some mystery, but the reveals aren't really anything too shocking as we kind of find out that these different characters are getting their minds controlled. And of course, it's revealed that Samuel Stearns is pulling the strings. And this, of course, is a super underrated character. We saw him in The Incredible Hulk, and they teased him turning into the leader. And that was all the way back in 2008, so we're finally getting to see him as the leader 17 years later. And just overall, I thought he was a really great villain. I think Tim Blake Nelson gave a really good performance, and he just feels kind of intimidating. Now, a lot of people weren't very happy with his design, and if you look at the character from the comics, in most of his depictions, he does have that really big head and that mustache and goatee. And the original design that they were going to go for with this movie, that was so set in place to the point where that's what the Funko Pop looks like, they ended up not using that, and in the reshoots, they changed the design to look different. I will say I do prefer the original design, but I don't actually hate the new design. I wouldn't even say it's not comic accurate because there are other depictions in the comics that actually do kind of look like that. And I appreciate how they used prosthetic makeup and that kind of stuff instead of motion capture. Plus, this also just looks more realistic, like how someone would actually look like if they were exposed to all that radiation and stuff. Now, there has been a complaint about the leader being so smart and calculating every possible outcome. And if he really knew all these probabilities, how could the good guys actually outsmart him and win? And admittedly, what they do in this movie is a little bit of a stretch, but at the same time, it's a comic book movie. It's never stuff like that that makes me decide I don't like it. Of course, another major character you have in here is Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, who's played by Harrison Ford this time. The actor that had played him in the other movies had actually passed away. So in this movie, he's kind of in a later phase of life where he's actually elected to be the president. And he's still trying to prove to his daughter that he's a good person, despite all the mistakes he's made in the past. And first of all, I actually do want to say I am glad that they included a little clip of like a news thing that showed him with the mustache. But for the rest of the movie, he obviously doesn't have the mustache, and I'm not sure if that was just because Harrison Ford didn't want to have a mustache, or if they just didn't want the Red Hulk to have a mustache. But regardless, I am glad we got to see that one little clip of him with it.
I'm still getting used to the new look.
They said lose the mustache.
But just overall, he has a really good character arc in this movie. And he's just one of those compelling characters because he's not necessarily a villain in the same way that so many other characters in the MCU definitely are villains. But he's also not necessarily a hero. And so that's just what makes him super compelling. And Harrison Ford did a great job in the role. And when you get to the end of the movie where he finally turns into Red Hulk, I think the VFX was actually really good. And it's just super awesome because since the regular Hulk has been a nerd for so long, we haven't got to see this type of destruction from any Hulk in a while. And I will say, going into the movie, I was kind of worried that the Red Hulk wouldn't be in it too much, because despite the fact that on all the posters, he's the #1 character that they're trying to market. But if you watch the trailer, all of the clips with him are just in this one setting. And so I was very worried that his only scenes would be in that one setting as kind of like the final battle. And so my fears did come true, but to be completely honest, I'm not as disappointed because I'm fine with what they did in the story building him up. And yes, the fight with him is only a few minutes, but in and of itself, it's a really good quality fight scene. But definitely a reason a lot of people are upset with this film is because of the fact that you have kind of 3 villains in here, and because you have all 3 of them, they all have to share the spotlight. But to be completely honest, I was fine with what they did with all of them, because obviously Sidewinder definitely works as a good side character. He's intimidating, and I didn't expect him to be like the main villain. And then the leader, I would say, is probably the main villain in here, and I think he definitely got enough spotlight. And then the Red Hulk definitely works in the final battle. I will say this, if they killed any of these characters off, I would have been upset because I do want to see more of them. But since all of them are still alive, I'm perfectly fine with how they were used in this film because we can definitely see them later on. Aside from the villains though, there are also some pretty good side characters in this. Like of course Joaquin, the new Falcon. He made his first appearance in The Falcon and Winter Soldier, which I thought he was kind of forgettable in that. But in here he's just much better. And the dynamic with him and Sam is done very well. Of course you also have Isaiah Bradley in here, and he's another one of those pretty compelling characters because of his history. And once again, I think what they do with him in this movie is much better than what they did in The Falcon and Winter Soldier. And a lot of people have been complaining that he didn't have enough screen time, but him being in prison for a huge chunk of the movie just kind of works into the plot that way. And I think we did get to see enough of him at the beginning and then at the end, and there's some good emotional moments with him. Maybe at some point in the middle while he was still in prison, maybe we could have gotten like a flashback or something of maybe his earlier years. But I think for the story they went with, they were able to show him enough. And of course you also have that agent character who was trained as a Black Widow, so that's just a nice connection to that part of the MCU. And of course you have a couple cameos in here with Bucky Barnes as well as Betty Ross at the very end of the film, and they were both nice little cameos. They served a purpose, and so this just connects very well to other films and projects in the MCU. I know some people have been complaining that they should have just made another Hulk film instead, and don't get me wrong, it is kind of absurd that we haven't had a Hulk film since 2008, and we definitely do need a new one. But I do think it is cool that since this is a shared universe, certain villains can work for multiple heroes. So as I said, this fits very well into the world of the MCU, and it also sets up some other stuff. So at the end of the day, this is a movie that I was pretty worried about, but at the end of the day, I really enjoyed the film, and I think while it's not flawless, it is pretty well made. The action is great, the performances are great, and I think all the character development works. So as long as you're willing to accept what they do with their usage of the villains, this is a movie that I would definitely recommend if you're a fan of Marvel. So overall, on the quality scale of 0 to 100, I'll give it an 86%. Again, it's not one of the greatest comic book movies of all time, but I would say it's definitely one of the better MCU movies in recent years. If you've seen it, let me know what you think about it in the comments section down below. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.